Hello, you are listening to a recording produced exclusively for MJam from London. It is not commercially available anywhere, and the audio reading is copyright to MJam from London and this YouTube channel. The reader is Matthew Jones. I hope you enjoy it. Wait and See by Cyril Hare. Detective Inspector Mallet of the CID was a very large man. He was not only tall above the average, but also broad in more than just proportion to his height, while his weight was at least proportionate to his breadth. Whether, as his colleagues at New Scotland Yard used to assert, his bulk was due to the enormous meals which he habitually consumed, or whether, as the inspector maintained, the reason for his large appetite was that so big a frame needed more than a normal man's supply for its sustenance, was an open question. What was not open to doubt was Mallet's success in his calling. But if anybody was ever bold enough to suggest that his success might have been even greater but for the handicap of his size, he would merely smile sweetly and remark that there had been occasions when, on the contrary, he had found it a positive advantage. Pressed for further and better particulars, he might, if in an expansive mood, go so far as to say that he could recall at least one case in which he had succeeded where a 12-stone man would have failed. This is the story of that case. It is not, strictly speaking, a case of detection at all, since the solution depended ultimately on the chance application of avoirdupois, rather than the deliberate application of intelligence. Nonetheless, it was a case which Mallet himself was fond of recollecting, if only because of the way in which that recollection served to salve his conscience whenever thereafter he fell to the temptation of a second helping of suet pudding. The story begins, so far as the police are concerned, at about 7 o'clock on a fine morning in early summer, when a milkman on his round came out of the entrance of Clarence Mansions, SW11, just as a police constable happened to be passing. "Morning," said the constable. "Morning," said the milkman. The constable moved on. The milkman stood watching him, two powerful questions conflicting in his breast. On the one hand, it was an article of faith with him that one whose work takes him to other people's houses at a time when most of the world is only beginning to wake up should never poke his nose into other people's business. On the other, he felt, just now, a craving, new-born but immensely powerful, not to be left out of the adventure which some sixth sense told him was afoot. The constable was almost out of earshot before the issue was decided. "Oi!" shouted the milkman. The officer turned round majestically. "What is it?" The milkman jerked his thumb in the direction of the block of flats behind him. "I don't know, but I think there's something queer up there." "Where?" "Number 32, top floor." "Well, how do you mean, queer?" "The dog up there's carrying on something awful. It's barking and scratching at the door." "Well, what of it?" "Well, nothing, but it's a bit queer, isn't it? It's a quiet dog as a rule." "Well, they've gone out and left him in, I suppose." "Well, if they have, they've left the light on as well." The constable looked up at the windows of the top story. "There is a light in one of the rooms. Seems funny, fine morning like this. Might as well go up and see, I suppose. They'll be having the neighbours complaining about that dog. I can hear it from here." With the milkman in attendance, he tramped heavily up the stairs. Clarence Mansions boasts no lift. To the top floor. Outside number 32 stood the pint bottle of milk which had just been left there, and he rang the bell. There was no reply, except a renewed outburst of barks from the dog within. "Are they at home, do you know?" "As far as I know. I had my orders to deliver, same as usual." "Who are the people?" "Wellman, the name is. A little fair chap with a squint. It's just two of them, and the dog." "I know him. Seen him about often. Passed the time of day with him. Didn't know he was married, though." "Oh, she never goes out. He told me about her once. Used to be a trapeze artist in a circus. Had a fall, crippled for good. Can't even get in and out of bed by herself, so he says." "Oh, Well, if that's so, perhaps, all the same, you can't go and break into a place just because a dog's howling and someone's left the light on. I think I'd better go and report it before I do anything. The milkman was looking down the stairs. Someone's coming up. It's Mr. Wellman, all right. A rather flushed, unshaven face appeared on the landing below. The constable put on his official manner at once. Mr. Wellman, sir, there have been complaints of your dog creating a disturbance here this morning, and I observe that there is a light on in one of your rooms. Would you be good enough to— It's all right, officer. I was kept out last night, you see, quite unexpectedly. I am sorry about the dog and all that. He fished a latchkey from his pocket and opened the door and went in, shutting it behind him. The other two, left outside with the milk bottle for company, heard him speak softly to the dog, which immediately became quiet. In the silence they could hear his footsteps down the passage, which evidently led away from the front door, and they turned to each other blankly. "Well," said the policeman. The milkman was already preparing to go back to his round. And then Mr. Wellman was out of his flat, his face white, his eyes staring, crying, "Come here, quick! Something awful's happened!" "But this," said Mallet, "is odd. Very odd indeed." He sat in the office of the divisional detective inspector, meditatively turning over a sheaf of reports. "Odd is the word for it. You see, on the one hand, there seems no doubt the lady was alive at 9 o'clock. Let me see if I've got the story straight. Mrs. Wellman is found dead in her bed at about 7 o'clock in the morning by her husband, in the presence, very nearly, of a police officer and another man. She's been killed by a blow to the back of her head from a blunt instrument. The doctor thinks death occurred about 7 to 11 hours previously, say between 8 o'clock and midnight the night before. He thinks also, in fact he's pretty sure, that the blow would produce instantaneous death, or at all events instantaneous unconsciousness, and there were no signs of forcible entry into the flat. Mrs. Wellman was a cripple, so the possibility of her getting out of bed to let anybody in's out of the question. Am I right so far?" "You're quite correct." "Well, in these circumstances, the husband quite naturally falls into suspicion. He's asked to account for his movements overnight, and up to a point seems quite willing to do so. He said he put his wife to bed at about 8:45, took the dog out for a short run. What sort of dog is it, by the way?" "It's an Alsatian. Seems good-tempered, an intelligent sort of beast." "He takes the Alsatian out for a short run, returns it to the flat without going into his wife's room, and then goes out again. That's his story. He says most positively that he never came back to the place until next morning, when the constable and the milkman saw him going in. Asked whether he had any witnesses to prove his story, he says he spoke to the constable on night duty, whom he met just outside Clarence Mansions on his way out, and he further gives the name of 2 friends whom he met at the Green Dragon public house, half a mile from Clarence Mansions." 750 yards from Clarence Mansions. "Oh, I'm much obliged. He met his 2 pals there at about 9:15 and stayed till closing time. He went from a public house with one of them to the nearest tram stop, and took a number 31 tram going east, or away from Clarence Mansions, and his friend went with him on the tram as far as the next fare stage, where he got off, leaving Wellman on the tram, still going away from home. Further than that, Wellman wouldn't help us. He said he'd spent the rest of the night in a little hotel near Hackney way. Why he should have done so he won't explain, and when asked for the name of the place he can't give it. He thought it had a red and green carpet in the hall, and that's all he could remember about it. The suggestion was, I gather, that he was too drunk to notice things properly when he got to the hotel, and was suffering from a bit of a hangover next morning. And he certainly was when I saw him. Things begin to look rather bad for Master Wellman. They even look worse when we find out a few things about him. It seems he hasn't a job. He hasn't had one for a very long time. He married his wife when she was travelling the country as a trapeze artist in a small circus, in which he was employed as an electrician and odd job man. When her rope broke and she was put out of the circus business for good, her employers paid her a lump sum in compensation, and he's been living on that ever since. His accounts show that he has got through it pretty quickly, and it's odds on she'd been wanting to know where it had gone to. It's not very hard to see a motive for getting rid of her. Well, the motive's there, all right, but here's where our troubles begin. Wellman is detained for inquiries, and the inquiries show that his story, so far as it goes, is perfectly true. He did meet pals at the Green Dragon. They and the publican are positive on the point, and they bear out his story in every particular. Therefore, if he killed his wife, it must have been before 9:15, or even 10:30, which was approximately the time when he was last seen in the number 31 tram. But Mrs. Wellman was alive when he left Clarence Mansions, because he pulled out one of the statements before him. Because statement of Police Constable Denny, at approximately 9:00 p.m., I was on duty in Imperial Avenue, opposite Clarence Mansions, when I saw Wellman. He had his dog with him. We had a short conversation. He said, "I've just been giving my dog a run." I said, "It's a nice dog." He said, "I bought it for my wife's protection, but it's too good-natured for a watchdog." He went into Clarence Mansions and came out again almost at once, with a small bag in his hand. I said, "Going out again, Mr. Wellman?" He said, "Yes. Have you seen my pals about anywhere?" I informed him that I did not know his pals, and he replied, "I expect they've gone on ahead." He then said, "I'm waiting to see if my wife has turned in yet." I looked up at the windows of Clarence Mansions, and there was a light in one of the windows on the top story, the window to the left of the staircase as you look at it. I have since learned that that is the window of the bedroom of number 32. As I was looking, the light was extinguished. Wellman said to me, "That's all right, I can get along now." We had a bit of a joke about it. He then went away, and I proceeded on my beat. At approximately 10:30 p.m. I had occasion to pass Clarence Mansions again. There were no lights visible in the top story. I did not pass the Mansions again until my way back from duty at approximately 6:15 a.m. I then observed that the same light was on, but I gave the matter no thought at the time. What sort of man is Denny? He's very intelligent and observant. One of the best uniformed men I have. Very well. We have it then on his evidence that Mrs. Wellman or somebody else in the flat extinguished the light a little after 9, and that somebody turned it on again between 10:30 p.m. and 6:15 a.m. I suppose Mrs. Wellman could turn it off and on by herself? Oh, undoubtedly. It's a bedside lamp. She had the full use of her arms. Therefore we are now driven to this. But Wellman killed his wife, if he killed her, after 10:30, when he was last seen on the tram, and before midnight, which is the latest time which the doctor thinks reasonably possible. Then comes the blow. To test Wellman's story, for what it is worth, we have made inquiries in Hackney to see if we can find a hotel of a kind that wouldn't mind taking in a gentleman the worse for liquor, with a red and green carpet in the hall, and handy to the number 31 tram route. And the very first place we try, we not only find that they remember Mr. Wellman there, but are extremely anxious to see him again. They tell us that he came to their place about 11:30, which is the time you would expect if he left the neighbourhood of the Green Dragon by tram an hour before. Persuaded whoever it was, who was still up at that hour, to give him a room, and next morning was seen going out at 6 o'clock, remarking that he was going to get a shave. And he never came back. And he never got the shave. Oh, true enough. When the hotel people opened his bag, which Police Constable Denny has identified, incidentally, it contained precisely nothing. So we packed him off to the Hackney police to answer a charge of obtaining credit by fraud, and asked the Yard to tell us what to do next. In other words, you want me to fix this crime onto somebody who has all the appearances of a perfect alibi for it. That's just it. If only the blighter had anything on him, it would have been used as a weapon. On Wellman were found a pencil, a small piece of cork, a pocket-knife, 2 shillings silver, and 6pence halfpenny bronze. Why do we have to go on saying bronze when all the rest of the world says copper? But the weapon. He could have taken that away in his bag and disposed of it anywhere between here and Hackney easily enough. We shall be lucky if we ever lay our hands on that. The alibi is our trouble. From 9 o'clock onwards it seems unbeatable. Therefore he must have killed his wife before 9. But if he did, who turned the light off in her room? I suppose the dog might have done it. Knocked the lamp over or something. There's no trace of the dog having been in the room all night. His footprints are quite plain on the carpet in the corridor, and I've been over the bedroom carpet carefully without any result. Also, there seems no doubt that the bedroom door was shut next morning. Wellman was heard to unlatch it. Besides, if the dog turned off the light, how did he turn it on again? Have you tested the fuses? In perfect order. No chance of a temporary fault causing the light to go off and on again. And Wellman was waiting for the light to go off when he was talking to Denny. Then we've got to work on the assumption that someone else got into the flat that night. Without disturbing the dog? A good-natured dog? But there were no signs of any entry anywhere. I've looked myself. Some of my best men have been on the job. But I haven't looked yet. Number 32 Clarence Mansions was exactly like all the other flats in the block, and indeed in Imperial Avenue. So far as its internal arrangements were concerned, 3 very small rooms looking onto the avenue opened out of a corridor which ran from the front door. 3 still smaller rooms opened out of another corridor at right angles to the first, and they enjoyed a view of the back of the mansions in the next block. At the junction of the 2 corridors, the gloom of the interior was mitigated by a skylight, the one privilege possessed by the top-story flats and denied to the rest of the block. The bedroom in which Mrs. Wellman had died was the room nearest the entrance. Mallet did not go into this room until he had first carefully examined the door and the tiny hall immediately inside it. There are certainly no marks on the lock. What's this powdery stuff down here? Dog biscuit. The animal seems to have had his supper here. There's his water bowl in the corner, too, by the umbrella stand. But he slept over there, said Mallet, nodding to the farther end of the corridor, where underneath the skylight was a large circular basket lined with an old rug. They went into the bedroom. The body had been removed, but otherwise nothing in it had been touched since the discovery of the tragedy. On its dingy walls hung photographs of acrobats, dancers and clowns, and the framed programme of a command variety performance, memorials of the trapeze artist's vanished career. The crumpled pillow bore a single shapeless stain of darkened blood. On a bedside table was a cheap electric lamp. Mallet snapped it on and off. This doesn't look as if it's been knocked over. Did you notice the scratches on the bottom panel of the door, by the way? It seems as though the dog was trying to get in from the passage. He went over to the sash window and subjected it to a prolonged scrutiny. No, definitely no. Now let's look at the rest of this place. He walked down the corridor until he reached the skylight. I suppose somebody could have got through there. But he would have come right down on top of a dog, the DDI objected. True, that would have been a bit of a strain for even the quietest animal. Still, there's no harm in looking. He kicked aside the sleeping basket and stood immediately beneath the skylight. The light's in my eyes. I can't see the underside of the frame properly. He stood on tiptoe, peering upwards. Just turn the electric light on, will you? I said, would you turn on the light? It is on. Nothing's happened. The bulb must have gone. Has it? Said Mallet, stepping across to the hanging light that swung within a foot of his hand. As he did so, the lamp came on. Curiouser and curiouser. Switch it off again. Now, you come and stand where I was. They changed places, and Mallet depressed the switch. The light was turned on at once. "Are you sure you're standing in the same place?" "Quite sure." "Jump." "What?" "Jump, as high as you can. Come down as hard as you can." The inspector sprang into the air, and his heels hit the floor with a crash. At that instant the light flickered, went out, and then came on once more. "Splendid. Now look between your feet. Did you see anything?" "There's a little round hole in the floorboard here. That's all." "Does the board seem at all loose to you?" "Yes, it does, quite a bit. But that's not surprising after what I've just done to it." "Let me see." Mallet went down on hands and knees and found the hole of which the other had spoken. It was quite small, hardly more than a fault in the wood, but its edges were sharp and clear. It was near to one end of the board. That end was completely unsecured, while the other was lightly nailed down. He produced a knife and inserted the blade into the hole. Then, using the knife as a lever, he found that he could pull the board up on its end, as though upon a hinge. "Look!" They gazed into the cavity beneath. On the joist on which the loose end of the board had rested was a small, stiff-coiled spring, just large enough to keep that end a fraction above the level of the surrounding floor. But what chiefly attracted the attention of the two men was not on the joist itself, but a few inches to one side. It was an ordinary electric bell-push, such as might have been found on any front door in Imperial Avenue. "Don't you recollect what Wellman's job was when he had a job?" "He worked in the circus as an odd-job man." "Oh, yes, good Lord, as an electrician." "Just so. Now, watch." He put his finger on the bell-push. The light above their heads went out. He released it, and the light came on again. "Turn on another light. Any light, I don't care which. In the sitting-room, if you like. Now." He depressed the button once more. "Does it work?" "Yes." "Of course it does!" He rose triumphantly, dusting the knees of his trousers. "The whole thing is too simple for words. The main electric lead of the flat runs under this floor. All Wellman has done is fit a simple attachment to it, so that when the bell push is pressed down, the circuit is broken and the current turned off. The dog's basket was on the board, and that meant that when the dog lay down, out went the light in the bedroom, and any other light that happened to be on. Only he took care that there were no other lights on. When the dog begins to get restless in the morning and goes down the passage to see what is the matter, you said he was an intelligent dog, didn't you? On comes the light again. Anybody in the street outside, seeing the lamp extinguished and lighted again, would be prepared to swear there was somebody alive in the room to manipulate the lamp. Oh, yes, it really is ingenious." But what?" "But the light didn't go off when I was standing there." "How much do you weigh?" 11 stone 7. Well, I'm quite a bit more heavy than that." "And that will be why. You see, there's a fraction of space between the board and the bell-push, and you couldn't quite force the board down far enough to make it work, except when you jumped. I had the advantage over you there." "But hang it all, I may not be a heavyweight, but I do weigh more than a dog. If I couldn't do this trick, how on earth could he? It doesn't make sense." "On Wellman were found a pencil, a small piece of cork, a pocket-knife, 2 shillings 6pence, and 6pence halfpenny bronze. Have you observed that the little hole in the board is directly above the button of the bell-push?" Yes, I see now that it is." "Very well. If a small piece of cork doesn't fit into that hole, I will eat your station sergeant's helmet. That's all." So when the cork is in the hole, when the hole is plugged, the end of a cork is resting on the bell push. It then needs only the weight of the basket plus the weight of the dog to depress the spring, which keeps the end of the board up, and the cork automatically works the bell push. Now, we can see what has happened. Wellman rigged up this contraption in advance, an easy matter for an experienced electrician. Then, on the evening which he had chosen for the crime, he put his wife to bed, killed her with the coal hammer, most probably. If you search the flat, I expect you'll find it missing, and then shut the door of the bedroom, leaving the bedside lamp alight. He next inserted the cork in the hole of the board and replaced the dog's basket on top. With a couple of dog biscuits in his pocket, he took the dog out for a run. He kept it out until he saw Police Constable Denny outside the flats. Probably he had informed himself of the times when that officer was on duty and could be expected to appear there, and he made his arrangements accordingly. Having had a word with Denny, he slipped upstairs and let the dog into the flat. But before he came down again, he took good care to give the dog his biscuits in the hall. It would never have done if the light had gone out before he was from the building. So he left the dog something to keep him at the other end of the passage for a moment or two. He knew that the dog, as soon as he had eaten his supper and had a drink of water, would go and lie down in his basket. I expect he had been trained to do it. Alsatians are teachable animals, they tell me. Then down in the street he waited until the dog had put the light out for him, and called Denny's attention to the fact. His alibi established, off he went. But he had to get back next morning to remove that bit of cork. Otherwise the next person who trod on the board would give the secret away. So we find that when he comes to the flat, the first thing he does is go down the corridor before he ever went into the bedroom, and that little bit of evidence always puzzled me. Now we know what he was doing. He was a fool not to throw the cork away, of course, but I suppose he thought nobody would think of looking at that particular place. So far as he knew, nothing could work the lights if the cork wasn't in place. He thought he was safe. And he would have been safe too, if there hadn't been that little bit of extra weight put on the board. He could not be expected to foresee me. Which explains, if it does not excuse, the slight but unmistakable touch of condescension with which Inspector Mallet thereafter used to treat his slimmer and slighter brethren. Wait and See was written by Cyril Hare and read by Matthew Jones. Thank you for listening.